What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the second part of these new format tier lists. We already did hand traps last time. If you missed that video, link to that is going to be in the description below. Today, I'm going to talk to you about board breakers. Certain non-engine cards you can play to not interrupt your opponent when you go second, but rather just like take your entire hand and play into their board. And I'm going to tell you what I think about currently popular options and which ones I like, which ones I don't. As usual, you know how tier lists work. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet, of course, I would really appreciate if you did that. Without further ado, let us start and get into the tier list. Once again, the premise, as already discussed in the hand trap tier list, is current format, current situation, Kashtira, Branded, Labyrinth, top 3, some Sprite. So we want the board breakers to be good against those types of decks. And I'm actually going to move 3 cards up here because I want to really get those out of the system. And that's the books. Judging from the most recent deck lists I've seen from the last YCS, Book of Eclipse seems to be one of the most played tech cards in the game right now because of how good it is against Kashtira if it gets to resolve going second. Because one thing we saw in the finals of YCS Las Vegas was that there is a way for Kashtira to prevent you from Book of Eclipsing their entire field, and that is to lock your entire spell and trap zone. Doesn't feel good when that happens, but that is their way of beating these power spells when breaking their board, because normally the Kashtira board is very weak to power spells, right? I think the key is to have some of these power spells in your deck for when they don't lock your entire spell and trap zone, but to also have some options to when they do. Cards like Nibiru, cards like other hand traps, cards like maybe Lava Golem, Kaijus. We're going to talk about some options today. I'm going to put Book of Eclipse in the strong in the main category. Just be aware that I don't think you can just rely on power spells, but they are good. So Book of Eclipse, I think, is very strong. I think Book of Moon, though, is actually also a very strong card. Now, the reason why I like Book of Moon, and I've seen it in some topping lists at YCS Las Vegas as well, is that Book of Moon is a less fancy effect than Book of Eclipse, but it has a couple of key advantages. If you go first, Book of Moon is much better because you can set it and you can use it as a disruption without flipping your own board first down, without giving your opponent card draw, without any of that drawback. Just like your opponent summons a Kashtira, you book it. That's a very strong way to play. It's not as good against Branded defensively, but still like not awful. Like especially going second, you can just book the Mirror Jade. You can book Iblis if they come up. It's a very flexible card and I like it. I think it's very good. It's less flashy going second. Like Book of Eclipse is just amazing going second when it resolves, but Book of Moon is also good. It's not like, you know, you don't book everything, but still like booking the Arise Art or booking the Shangri Era if it's locked a couple of your monster zones. Stuff like that is still valuable for a tech card. So I think Book of Moon is playable. Book of Lunar Eclipse, I think, is kind of the middle way between these two, because like it's better going first than Book of Eclipse. It's more impactful going second than Book of Moon, but the discard is really annoying. So I don't know. You'd have to have good reasons to play this over the other two. It tries to be in the middle of these two in terms of what it does, but I'm not convinced by it yet, because the biggest problem is that under Arise Hard, whatever you discard for Book of Lunar Eclipse gets banished, and that's very annoying. It'd be really easy to use it as like a good discard outlet if the discard didn't get banished. That's really annoying. But still, there might be some scenarios where this card is good. Also, one thing worth noting, Book of Eclipse can get ashed, which is not true for the other two cards. And Ash is in almost every deck right now, especially Kashtira. So Book of Eclipse can get ashed, and if they play Forbidden Lands, which is another big deal when you're playing these spell cards, that already makes 6 possible answers to Book of Eclipse in Ash Blossom and Forbidden Lands. So consider the other two maybe as well. Like you could even play both. I've tried decks with both Eclipse and Moon and it was fine, I think. So that's all right. I guess in the same vein is Swords of Concealing Light. Unfortunately, I think it's mediocre. It's definitely not bad. The bottom category is called mediocre / bad. I don't think it's bad. The problem with this card is it gets outed by a Rise Art. It does nothing going first. It loses to stuff like Anti-Spell. And so overall, even though it would be really nice, if it resolves, it's pretty nice, but it doesn't usually resolve. I feel like that's the problem with the card. And if you're playing a dedicated board breaker to out like a Kashtira board, you really want it to be resolving. This card's actually not that bad against Branded, I think. Going second, you can just book the entire board. Outs like Masquerades, Mirror Jades, whatnot. I think it's actually solid against Branded, but that alone I don't think makes it good. Alpha, the Master of Beasts. as always, you guys know, if you've ever seen one of my board breaker tier lists before, is that I have respect for this card. I think this card is awesome. But once again, it not being a quick effect to bounce makes it a little vulnerable, because if you summon it into a Kashtira board, they can just bounce it with a Rise Heart. If you have a way to force the Rise Heart before summoning it, then I guess it's kind of cute. Chalice has been seeing some main deck success at YCS Las Vegas, which is why I'm going to put it here. Chalice is kind of a weird one because it's a little underwhelming, but at the same time, it's just also very flexible and very consistent in what it does. It's kind of like Imperm with some advantages and some downsides. Of course, going second, Chalice does not act as a hand trap. It acts as a board breaker, kind of like a little help. I think this card is probably underwhelming in most decks, but the one deck that can actually play it, I think, fairly well is Kashtira, because Kashtira really is... I've heard people refer to it, and I've also now referred to it a couple of times, just like a new version of Zodiac, where it's got a lot of one-card combos, and you pair that up with some non-engine. And in the case of Kashtira, the non-engine doesn't have to be the most impactful cards in the game. Also, because I see people mentioning it right now, Forbidden Chalice makes people think of Forbidden Lands. I didn't include Forbidden Lands because it's not really a board breaker. It's more so a card that people use to protect their Arise Heart. If you wondered what I think about Forbidden Lands, I think Forbidden Lands is quite strong as long as everyone plays Book of Eclipse. So it doesn't belong into this tier list technically, but I think Forbidden Lands is a solid tech card in Kashtira specifically to protect from Eclipse, Moon, Chalice, whatnot. Like it's a good card, I think. Change of Heart alongside Mind Control are actually in very different tiers this format, I think. They are both very good side deck cards against Kashtira, but the problem with Mind Control is that you need to play your own Arise Heart in the extra deck if you play Mind Control. With Change of Heart, you don't need it. You just need to play like 2 Zeuses, and then you can just take something, crash with it, make Zeus. It's really nice at breaking the board. Mind Control, unfortunately, you can't attack with the monster, so you can't Zeus. But I think taking control of Kashtira's monsters is a quite good mechanic in this format. Change of Heart significantly stronger than Mind Control, and that's that. Of course, in other matchups, Change of Heart is also solid. Like it helps breaking any board. Like in terms of what you want the board breaker to do, Change of Heart is pretty solid. The only deck that it doesn't really do much against is Labyrinth. Every other deck, I feel like, is annoyed by Change of Heart, at least somewhat. Dark Hole, between these, I guess Raigeki, I think actually Dark Hole is slightly better than Raigeki. The most usage I've seen from Dark Hole is as a target for thrusting, which we'll talk about thrusting in a second. But the advantage that Dark Hole has over Raigeki, because it looks really weird that, like, why would a card like Dark Hole ever be better than Raigeki, is that Dark Hole outs Ibli. That alone, I think, is enough reason to play it over Raigeki, because like when you're going second, you're not gonna have monsters anyways, so they are most of the time the same card unless your opponent Ibli locks you. Then Dark Hole is just straight up better. And I think that's why Dark Hole overall takes the cake. The one thing that's worth noting, unfortunately, it does not out the freaking Shangri era, because for some reason that thing has destruction protection. Yeah, Dark Hole will not help you when your zones are locked. And that's the one downside to it. But other than that, I think it's pretty solid. Dealing with a Rise Heart, if they don't have Forbidden Lands, is quite nice. Forbidden Droplet, I've seen it in a lot of decks, but I'm not actually super convinced by the card yet. I don't love it because I feel like there's not that many decks right now that love the investment of having to get rid of like 1 or 2 cards from your hand to answer the board. Of course, the card does nothing to Kashtira because you cannot pay the cost for Forbidden Droplet. That's why this card can never be main decked in this format, in my opinion. Because Arise Heart is Macrocosmos and Droplet is cost to send to the graveyard, so it does not work under Macrocosmos-like effects. So that's bad. But then it's also not that good in other matchups, I feel like. It's like, yeah, it's okay against Sprite, but do you really want to send like 2 or 3 cards or 1 or 2 cards from your hand to the grave just to negate some stuff? I don't love Droplet. Against Despia, yeah, you can negate the Mirror Jade. Yeah, you can send away Ibli. I feel like that's the main reason why people have been playing it. It doubles as a solid side deck card overall, and it outs like Ibli and whatnot. It doesn't help with specifically the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, because that is a lingering effect, and that's why I think it's gonna go down in usage a lot. Enemy Controller is probably even almost good enough. Like if Kashtira gets really popular, this card is actually main deckable, I think. Like this card is unironically solid. You notice a trend here? All the quick play spells are just like kind of good this format, because all of these quick plays, they help you with beating the Kashtira board, but they are also like solid in other matchups. The big advantage of these is that they all also work going first. And that's really something that can't be stressed enough, is like in a format like this, where most of the decks do want to go first, having a card that simply works going first and second is kind of nice utility. It's kind of wild to see cards like Book of Moon, Book of Eclipse, Forbidden Chalice, and Econ. I think all of these are like 10 plus years old. In the case of Book of Moon and Econ, almost 20 years. Seeing these cards pop back into the metagame and just being like good cards, not just niche, is amazing to see for me. Yeah, so I mean, that's nice. I like to see Enemy Controller. One of my favorite cards. One of my actual favorite cards. Evenly matched is between strong in the main and good in the main. The reason why it's strong in the main is that because most decks right now simply don't put up negates. And that makes evenly matched a lot more valuable, right? Kashtira doesn't put up negates. The only deck that really puts up negates is Sprite with Sprite Carrot. And even that you might be able to bait. And it's really good against Labyrinth. It's not really good against Despia, but it's solid against Despia. Despia doesn't have negates, so it can't really play around it. It has some setups where it's not that useful. If they, for example, go for the branded expulsion lock, which they usually don't do in game 1, later on, that might disable you evenly. Also, Ibly disables it. So honestly, I don't even love that card as a side deck card because there's some measurements that the top decks can take for it. But in the main deck, I think it has its place. As a side deck card, there's probably better cards. Fenrir, outside of the context of Kashtira, of course. In Kashtira, you're always going to main Fenrir, but like, I feel like people have forgotten that Fenrir still is a completely reasonable card to main deck in almost any deck. I think Fenrir has gotten a lot stronger last format because there is now no more Tierlist, and Tierlist was a deck that used a lot of hand traps that would end up being on the field. So Fenrir would like, you know, clash with Bistials, clash with Havnis, clash with Kelbeck, clash with Tierlist's Kashtira or whatever. It was like annoying. But now, almost any deck can just play Fenrir. And I feel like I haven't seen many Fenrirs outside of Kashtira, and that's a little weird to me because I think that card is still really good. It's really good going first. It's really good going second still. I mean, like, worst case, it baits the Arise Heart with a special summon. Best case, it just breaks the board. It's like good against almost any matchup. I think actually I'm gonna move it up. I've talked myself into. I think Fenrir is strong. Fenrir does not break any of the current boards alone, but none of those cards really do that except for Book of Eclipse if it resolves. But it really helps to just have Fenrir. It's just great. It doesn't lose to Forbidden Lands. It doesn't lose to Anti-Spell. It doesn't lose to if Kashtira goes for locking all your back row. I think Fenrir is just a solid card. And now we have the I'ma tribute your shit stuff. Lava Golem, Sphere Mode, Godarla representing the Kaijus, and Kurikara. Now these are, in my opinion, very interesting cards, and there's actually a very in-depth discussion to be made about these. I'm gonna preface it by saying we saw a lot of Lava Golem and a lot of Sphere Mode at the recent YCS, and I'm gonna say I was mildly disappointed by how they performed, because there has been a line for Kashtira players that I feel like a lot of them went for that plays around Nibiru, Lava Golem, and Sphere Mode, which is why it was such a popular line for people to do, which is the one where instead of going for the full Kashtira combo, you go for just 3 special summons and then you make a Rice Heart and then you pass, because it turns out a Rice Heart is still a macro Cosmos and can remove a card as a quick effect. You pair that up with some books, some hand traps, some non-engine, whatever. That's a pretty good opening, especially if your opponent has a dead Lava Golem, a dead Nibiru, or a dead Sphere Mode in their hand. Lava Golem and Sphere Mode, if your deck does not rely on the normal summon, are still gonna be good. And I'm gonna say, I mean, it depends on whether you want to main deck them or side them, but honestly, if your deck can play them, they are actually okay to main deck even. Like, I've seen Runic decks that main deck them. I've seen Dark World decks that main deck them. I think it's totally reasonable. Just be aware that it's kind of a weird dynamic in this upcoming format where some of these cards are always going to be good. Like, for example, a Book of Moon has a hard time being bad. Like, it's a very consistent card. It can also only do so much, right? There's a ceiling to how much Book of Moon can do. The impact on Book of Moon is limited. Whereas a card like Sphere Mode or Lava Golem, when they resolve, are insanely strong, right? They probably win you the game on the spot. But when your opponent plays around them, they don't do anything, right? And so I think the right way to approach it is you either have to be ballsy and make a good meta call and be like, I don't think anyone plays around Lava Golem. I'm just going to play Lava Golem and rely on it, and that's going to be good. If you make the right call, you can be rewarded for it. If you make the wrong call, you can be punished. Or you can go for the super consistent approach and be like, yeah, I'm just going to play like Book of Moon, Imperm, Ash, because they will always do something. And both of those approaches are fine. One is the high risk, high reward. The other one is the low risk, low reward. You can also go with a mix. You can be like, hey, I'm going to play Lava Golem. So if they play into it, I can punish it. And if they play around it, I have like, you know, a couple of Imperms and Book of Moons in my deck. So if they only make only a Rise Heart, then I also have a decent chance of beating that, which is also a fine, like, middle ground. Just be aware that what these cards do when you put them into your deck. You know, like, this card is a high risk, high reward card. This card is a low risk, low reward card. And maybe you can mix them to get a reasonable result as well. Or you just go full risk or no risk at all. Speaking of middle ways, Kaijus. I have been thinking lately, maybe Kaijus are back. Maybe Kaijus aren't that bad this format, because the Kashtira deck, even if it goes for the full combo, where you would normally rather have Lava Golem, Sphere Mode, or Nibiru, maybe you're still happy with the Kaiju, because that card is just really consistent, similar to Book of Moon versus Book of Eclipse. It's kind of like Kaiju versus Lava Golem, because yes, Lava Golem outs more things, but Lava Golem can be played around, and Kaijus are just like always gonna do their thing. Even if they do the full combo and they have a Rise Heart, Shangri-Ira, whatever, the Kaiju still helps. It still helps to just give them a Kaiju and out the Arise Heart or out the Shangri-Ira, you know? Of course, one big thing, they do not block your normal summon, so literally every deck can consider playing Kaijus. There's some decks that can't play Lava Golem because they need the normal summon. Almost any deck can play Kaijus. Kadarla was still in the image because it was from last format where it had to be the wind one. The best one now is probably just Gameciel. Just make sure you don't give them a level 7 Kaiju. I think that's the problem. Like, don't give them a level 7. Like, Gameciel is level 8. Kadarla is level 8. Just don't play Kumungus or like any of the level 7s. Maybe you can even play Slumber now that people are mentioning it. I don't know if you want to go that high on Kaijus, but maybe. It's not out of the question. Maybe you can play like 2 to 3 to 4 Kaijus and then play Slumber. I don't hate the idea, but that's something that I would probably not main deck. I could see a world where you main deck 3 Kaijus because you think they're good. And then you side deck 2 more Kaijus and Slumber for when you go second. For going first, blind in game 1, I would think that Slumber plus a couple Kaijus is probably too much for me personally. The moral of the story here is that 1-for-1 trades are kind of back because they are solid against Kashtira. Once again, it reminds me so much of Zodiac format, where in Zodiac, you would also see cards like Enemy, Chalice, like Monster Reborn kind of 1-for-1 extenders, Raigeki to out the monster, a Kaiju to out the Trident. I feel like it's very similar, this format, really. It's very interesting to see this development of like so many cards that were like not even really considerable last format, but like suddenly the meta development changes. And I love that type of stuff. I really like the innovation that we've seen so far in this new format, and I'm looking forward to like being able to make meta calls because there's so many different viable board breakers. Another one that I want to talk about is Kurikara. I think Kurikara is criminally underplayed right now because Kurikara is just really nice against Kashtira with very low risk as well. Like, it's similar to a Kaiju. I feel like it's almost impossible to play around Kurikara if you're playing Kashtira. I don't know if Kurikara is better or more consistent than any of these other options, but I certainly think Kurikara is a good side deck card for Kashtira. It's the one that I see myself not playing in the main deck, probably. Like, maybe you can, maybe, but I don't see it being more consistent than a Kaiju across the board against all the decks. It's good against Cash, but is it also consistently good against Branded? Is it consistently good against Sprite, Labyrinth? I don't know. Although some of these other cards are also not very good against Labyrinth. But the reason why I personally consider putting Kurikara in some of my decks right now is the following. I think spell cards would be better against Kashtira, but I'm very afraid that if I play too many spell cards in my deck, too many spell board breakers, that I'm just gonna get locked my back row by the full combo, and then I can't beat that. So I need something in my deck. Like, I need like Kaijus or Lava Golem or Sphere Mode or Kurikara or Nibiru or other hand traps. Something to stop them from locking all my back row and just winning the game when I only play spell cards. And I think Kurikara is a good one to do that, because it's like, if they lock all your back row, you can still play with Kurikara, maybe, depending on what they do. If they don't use the Shangri-Ira in your standby phase, and then you don't have a way to bait any other banishes, then it's going to be dead. But For the most part, I think Kurikara is cool. It's kind of similar to Nibiru. It's a little bit less weak to Ibli because, and that's the same thing for Kaijus and Lava Golem. Kaijus, Lava Golem, and Kurikara technically get stopped by Ibli. Nibiru does too. But you can play Linguribo to re-enable Kurikara, Lava Golem, Kaiju, but you can't play Linguribo to re-enable Nibiru because at that point it's too late. Also, if they play around Nibiru by just making a Rise Heart in 4 summons, Kurikara claps that. They can have as many Forbidden Lances as they want. If they go for just a Rise Heart and you have Kurikara, you clap them up. And that's cool if people actually do that a lot. Lightning Storm. Lightning Storm's alright. The thing is, like, most people summon their stuff in defense because there's not that many reasons not to do that. It's really only good for popping backrow. That's really it, and that's like for Labyrinth. I think it's okay as like a one-off target for thrusting. Same with Feather Duster. I don't think backrow is your main priority in this format, but of course Labyrinth is a thing. Of course they have like Lord of the Heavenly Prison and whatnot. They have tools to prevent Duster. They cite Solemn Judgment as well, stuff like that. Duster is definitely still good as a target for thrusting as well. So Duster is okay to side, and Lightning Storm is also okay to side. Pancreatops might also be okay to side again. It felt very mediocre last format. I kind of like it specifically because it just pops the Arise Heart without them being able to do much about it. It's like a solid one-off. Like, it's never gonna win me the game on its own, but if I have it against Kashtira going second, I'm always gonna be happy about it. Like, I'm always just gonna be able to like summon it, maybe attack over something, even if they don't have the field spell, like attack over Fenrir and then pop the Arise Heart. If they don't use it beforehand, they probably would. It's also okay against Labyrinth because it beats most of their floodgates. Like, if they go first, they have a monster, and they flip a skill drain, you can out it. If they flip a Gozen match, you can out it. If they flip whatever they play, whatever they might play, you can out it with Pancreatops. So I think Pancreatops is overall a solid one of, it's not like your highest priority. It's not like when you start building your side deck, the first card you throw in absolutely is Pancreatops. But if you ever have like a situation where you have like 14 side deck slots and you're like, I kind of want one more for like some matchups, I think Pancreatops is fine. It's also pretty good against Sprite, I would say, because it's just big, beefy, attacks something, baits something, pops something. I think it's good. Pancreatops is gonna be nice. Super Poly, weirdly enough, doesn't strike me as that good right now because, how do I say this? It doesn't feel like it hits enough decks for super hard. It's probably okay against Sprite. It's probably okay against Kashtira, but once again, you really rely on them playing into it. It's kind of like, if they make the play where they play into Super Poly, which is the one where they go for Diablosis plus a Rise Heart, because those are the ones that you can Super Poly into Mud Dragon. First of all, you need to play like 2 Mud Dragons, because they could just take it and then your Super Poly is dead. Or if they don't play into it, like, then it's also dead. And if they play into Super Poly, why not just play Nibiru? Why not just play Lava Golem? Why not just play Sphere Mode? Because any combo that plays into Super Poly also plays into those. It might be better against like Branded maybe, but even there, I'm not sure. It's like, it's mid. I feel like it's mid. You can play around with it. It's never that bad, I think. Like, it's probably gonna perform okay, but I just don't love it, this format. Yeah, experiment with it. I'm sure it's not bad, but it feels kind of mid. Dark Ruler feels like an okay side deck card to me. I think it's good against Sprite. It's good against Sword Soul, which is a deck that I think it's rogue, to be clear. I think Sword Soul is rogue, but it's definitely like played. And having a card like Dark Ruler that just like takes care of Sword Soul is fine. It's not very good against Labyrinth. I would not personally like it against Kashtira. I think there is way better cards for that. It's not that good against Despia. I guess if you have it in your side deck and you go up against Despia, you can side it. It's like, it stops any Masquerade shenanigans, stops the Mirror Jade. It's okay. Overall, it's just okay, I think. Ultimate Slayer, on the other hand, I actually think is better than people think right now. It's not a main deck card, once again, because it is cost, and so it cannot be used against Kashtira, and it takes a significant amount of extra deck space. But there is one deck where I think we're gonna see some Ultimate Slayer being played, and I think it's very good in that deck, and that's Labyrinth. I was actually surprised to not see Ryan Yu play Ultimate Slayer in the side deck, because he was already playing Dogmatica Punishment in the main deck, so he was already using Bucephalus, Garura, Entis, and Aggregator in the extra deck. If you are at that point, I think Ultimate Slayer is just a solid side deck card. I really think so, because if your extra deck already doesn't matter, or you already have all that stuff in your extra deck, you can side this card against Branded. It's really good against Branded. You can side it against Sprite now, because Sprite does not have Elf anymore, so you can literally target whatever you want. It's good against Sword Soul if you play Asynchro for it, which is not really a problem if you're playing Labyrinth. You have a good target for every matchup now, and your extra deck doesn't matter if you're playing Labyrinth. So I think specifically in Labyrinth, this card is probably going to see some play. I think it's solid. You might have other priorities, that is true. You might have other priorities, but I think Ultimate Slayer is a solid card in Labyrinth specifically. I think that's good. Because Labyrinth specifically like just wants to go like set 5 without losing any cards. So if you can go for like Ultimate Slayer, send Entis or Garura for a free +1 and then still set 4 or 5, that'd be like just fine, honestly. I think it's just a very free like +1 that you can easily take going second. It helps a lot going second into getting into a grind game with Labyrinth. So I like that card. And last but not least, Talents and Thrusting. Thrusting, I think, takes a big hit this format. First of all, some decks don't even play hand traps anymore because they rely on board breakers, which is a solid approach. If you go first, you never know if your opponent is actually going to hand trap you. They might just be on board breakers and just your thrusting might be dead. Another thing is that there's no hand traps anymore. Of course, they still exist, but people don't play many hand traps anymore that put themselves onto the field. Almost no main deck Bystials, no more Kelbegs, no more Havnis, no more Tearlaments Kashtira. This card loses so much value going first that I think you can only side it anymore. I would not main deck this card in any build right now. I don't think it's that good. I think this card is a side deck card. I think it's a good side deck card, but the problem is you can only really side it for going second, but that's the case for most of these side deck cards, so that's fine. I think it is a strong going second side deck card, and it's going to see some play, being able to play like one copy of Evenly, one copy of Talents, one copy of Change of Heart, one copy of whatever, Dark Ruler, Feather Duster, and being able to fetch it whenever you need it, I think is good utility. I think we're going to see some triple track thrusting in side decks. I think it's a good choice, but it loses a lot of quality that it had last format. This card was good in the main deck. This card you could side going first and second. People would side this card going first in the tier mirrors because every single hand trap you would be able to just go like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna thrusting for instant fusion. You can't really do that this format, and so like this is a side deck card for that reason. Talents, I think, is very strong going second, but going first has the similar problem of this, a little bit less because it works against Ash. Like, people play Ash, and so there's at least one hand trap that it works against. People also play Nibiru, but I'm gonna be honest, besides Ash and Nibiru, I really don't expect many hand traps to be played other than Imperm, but Imperm doesn't trigger Talents. So going first, Talents is probably gonna be dead a decent amount of the time, which is annoying. So I don't know if I would call it strong in the main deck, but going second, it's awesome, especially against Kashtira. They can't really play around it because Arise Heart is mandatory, so you can always trigger it unless your back row gets locked. And then, you know, going Talents to take one of their monsters, attack, make Zeus is really strong. But I don't know if I would main deck it as much. I think this is almost more of a one-off side deck card for thrusting as a target almost for going second. You can still experiment with it for the main deck, but personally, I think most of these other cards are more consistent good main deck options. And that is my take on these board breakers. As you will notice is that I put a lot of these cards relatively high up on this list because I really think board breakers are in a good spot this format, because most of the decks right now don't put up any sort of negates, and that's why board breakers really shine in a format like that, where you can really sometimes just let your opponent play their entire turn, not interrupt them a single time, and still win the game by simply having one or two powerful spells or like lava golems in your hand. And I think that's cool. I think that's very nice. I think that's a cool dynamic. I appreciate the option to be like, yeah, I can play hand traps, I can play board breakers, I can play a mix. I think that's cool. I'm looking forward to making some deck building decisions like that. If there's any particular board breaker that I was missing in this, feel free to comment down below and ask me about it. But until then, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, feel free to subscribe to the channel. It would mean a lot to me. Say goodbye to YouTube chat, and I will hopefully see you guys on the next video or the next stream. Link to the stream is also in the description below. Hope this was helpful. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and peace.